In this video, we're giving you an update on the April Brewers Cup, and we're meeting up with the winner of the Los Angeles edition from earlier this year, Ian. Welcome, my name is Patrick Rolfe and this is Coffee with April. For this episode, we're continuing the journey with the April Brewers Cup, a coffee competition that is international and based around the April Brewers that we launched late last year. Now, we hosted our latest competition in Los Angeles early this year, and the video that we're watching today is there to celebrate and represent the winner of the April Brewers Cup in Los Angeles, Ian. But before we jump into a conversation with him where he shared his winning recipe, we also want to give you a little bit of an update on the April Brewers Cup in general. Because we had a lot of national competitions and the World Coffee Championships coming up early this year, we decided to take a little bit of a pause, but now after the World Brewers Cup is finished in Chicago, we're now ready to release the next competitions that are coming for the April Brewers Cup. And following here over the next few months, we're going to see competitions in South Africa, Colombia, Romania, Belgium, Hong Kong, and so on. We're going to see quite a few different competitions coming up, and we have more dates and more countries to announce later in the year as well. So make sure you stay tuned to our newsletters, to our social media, to this channel here to see what is coming next in terms of the April Brewers Cup. Now, without further ado, another congratulations to Ian that won the Los Angeles edition of the April Brewers Cup. Here comes Ian representing his recipe, and after that, we're following up with a little bit of a chat with him.
Hey everyone, I'm Ian Lacour. I'm the winner of the April Brewers Cup LA edition. And today I'm just going to be sharing with you one of my favorite ways to make coffee and also my winning recipe. We're going to be drinking some of this beautiful Guatemalan coffee that I got while I was in LA from Three Marks Coffee. It's a really sweet coffee. And it offers a lot of some really interesting grape-like qualities that I think are really fun and cool, given that it is a Guatemalan coffee. So I've got 15 grams of coffee right here. Now today I'm going to be using 225 grams of water. That's going to be about a 1:15 ratio. I'm also going to turn off the kettle. And the starting water temperature that I'm using is 185 degrees Fahrenheit. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm using 70 grams on my first pour. Nice and gently. And then we're gonna let that go for 30 seconds. It's really sweet. After this 30 seconds is up, we're going to split this into one pour, but kind of split it into halves. So 77.5 grams, 2 times. But we'll start with a circular motion and then go right into a straight pour motion. And typically, anytime I finish in a straight pour, I'm basically trying to make sure I get a really nice clean cup, because I want to keep my flow rate pretty gentle and nice and steady. I'm also starting at the base of the filter and then going towards the center of the brewer. And then once I hit the 145 mark, I'm going to gently go into a straight pour of about 4 grams a second. And just like that, we're done. So this recipe usually finishes around like 1 minute and 5 seconds, 1 minute and 10. And I usually let it draw down until about like 2.5 minutes. And this was the recipe that I used in the competition with our coffee. And I just found that it had, it gave us a really good mouthfeel and texture, more importantly. And the reason for turning off the kettle and giving us that declining temperature so that we can kind of emphasize the mouthfeel and the sweetness, especially for the competition coffee that we use as well. If you're struggling with this recipe, usually I just try to use that 2.5 minutes to kind of dictate what we should do. And then obviously taste is important as well. If it is a little short of 2.5 minutes, then I would definitely grind a little finer. And the same thing could be said if it's drawing down a little too fast as well. But mixing things up to your preference is kind of what's going to be most important. This is just a recipe I go to from time to time. And it's a recipe I thought just really suited the really nice and rich profile of the coffee that we got for competition. So right at 2.5 minutes on, actually. It's a super sweet and very just nice and intense on the aromatics as well. It's got tons of that red grape that I was talking about earlier. A little bit of this like cherry soda as well, which is kind of fun. And then tons of chocolate, which I think is such a fun surprise from a Guatemalan coffee like this. But yeah, this is my recipe. This is also how I like to brew at home a lot. And I think that's what's honestly most important, especially when we're trying to have fun and just drink coffee at home. Cheers.
So we just saw Ian's winning recipe from the April Brewers Cup in Los Angeles, and now we're sitting here with him. Hi, man. How are you doing?
Hey, good. How are you?
Good. Definitely. It's getting, I'm about to say it's becoming spring in Copenhagen, but that means like minus degrees and risk for snow. So not so much spring vibes, but it's getting better. Keeping busy as per usual. What have you been up to since the competition? I know there's quite a lot of things you actually have been up to.
Yeah. So I actually had my last day at the current roaster I was working with, just to focus more on some home projects. Definitely some more coffee projects coming soon. You know, since winning the competition, I think that's what I'll continue to do so far. And then I just have another job on the side at the moment, so just kind of taking it easy.
Yeah, awesome. Figuring out the way, right?
Yeah.
So I think in the world of coffee, that's sometimes a little bit of a challenge. Or, you know, let's put it like this. There's many different ways you could go down, right? And sometimes it's smart to take a little bit of a break to kind of see what's out there before you kind of dive in all in, right? Mm-hmm. So we just saw your recipe, right? And let's just kind of jump straight into the recipe, and then after that, talk a little bit about maybe the competition in general and all of this, right? So what are the kind of, you know, key things from the recipe you would say? Like, what's the most important part? Was it a very difficult recipe to figure out? Was it a recipe that was based on the competition coffee, because we do have a compulsory competition coffee? Or is it a recipe that you kind of used to do and you just kind of brew with in various shapes and forms?
Well, I had actually prepared a little bit before I even got to practice coffee. I kind of had a lot of my more coffee-oriented friends who were very good tasters at home with me, comparing recipes, kind of dialing in recipes on certain coffees. I practice on a really dense coffee. I practice on a not very dense coffee. And then I also practiced, I think, on something that was very, very, very high in acidity. So we had a lot to kind of maneuver whenever we got the coffee in. I had like a really good starting point. But I actually found that the coffee was quite challenging from a taste perspective. Not necessarily from a brewing perspective. I think pretty much most coffees are easy to brew. I think it's really a matter of taste that's going to drive where that recipe goes, right? And this coffee, I just thought, I cupped it first and it was quite surprising because I thought it was quite rich and it kind of lacked a little bit of acidity in the cupping. So I knew that to be different and to kind of be distinct from my other competitors, that the cup needed some acidity. So I knew that the recipe I used should kind of reinforce that. And it's not really a recipe that I use a lot. It's actually a recipe I use with older coffees, is what I would say. But yeah, and then it was too many pours. Definitely seemed to do too much to the coffee. I could tell that some kind of lower extraction percentage was probably where this coffee tasted best. And I had to go very coarse than I usually do. But that was just that batch. I felt like the competition batch was a little different.
Yeah, sure.
I think we all kind of felt that whenever we were there, just dialing things in, making sure we were everything tasted right. Because I did wind up going a little. Actually, did I? I think like a click finer, but it did taste different, a little inherently different. Because I thought it was a coffee. I was in my head about like, I'm pretty sure I know what coffee this is. It took me a minute to figure it out, but then I was like, I think I know what coffee this was, and I was wrong, but I was not far off.
Well, what did you think it was, just out of curiosity?
I thought it was the what's the name of the Azul farm again? The Vulcan Azul. I thought it was the Vulcan Azul that you had on the menu already on your website.
Okay. Yeah.
The notes were spot on to me. I thought that there was tons of cherry, tons of milk chocolate, and tons of brown sugar, and I was like, that's it. And I actually put in my script those notes because I didn't know when we were going to get told what the coffee actually was. So I thought maybe, if I put those notes in there and let's say I'm right, well, I just like nailed that. I just like kind of got it in their head that like I know what it is. But I had to change my script obviously a little bit since we, well, yeah, to suit that whenever we got there and tasted it again.
So for those of you that don't know, the way that we basically decide or structure the kind of roasted coffee thing for the competition is that, one, obviously everyone is using the same coffee because we want it to be a brewing competition, not a sourcing competition. And two, we then have a green coffee sponsor internationally, Triop, which is actually based in Taiwan, a good friend of mine. And then they basically ship our coffee and then we roast it locally as much as we can. So this batch was roasted by Kumquat or Low Quad, then same company. Okay, so that was super interesting. And you say, I'm just curious, you mentioned one note when you were describing your recipe, and just to kind of iterate it quickly, it's like 15 grams of coffee, 225 grams of water. You said it was a recipe kind of suited for older coffees to some degree. What do you think makes the recipe more suitable for that?
I think because of how fast it brews. It is, I mean, for the competition, I actually knew that I could not brew the judges' cups at the same time because of how fast it brews. And what I mean is not the total drawdown time, but what I mean is the actual time it takes to brew the cup. So I knew that it took literally a minute and like 5 seconds to brew each cup. So I did not have time, especially with how the pouring structure worked for that recipe. I did not have time to do each cup at the same time. And to me, I actually saw that as a good thing because I could go one serve, one serve, one serve, and what's cool about that is that you can kind of, pinpoint where in the script you should start and stop, start and stop. And also because it's so quick, you save so much time on your script. You can do so many things before you even brew. So what I ended up doing was talking about the coffee and the recipe. Talking about some background information and some other things kind of leading up to the recipe before even brewing. And then while it was brewing, talking about the brewing. And then after that, I had plenty of time to do anything else. And I knew before that round started that that was going to be a huge thing. So yeah.
How much did you consider? So also for those of you that don't know, it's kind of a 2-round system, right? Where the initial round is a knockout, you brew 1 cup, and then final round is basically, brewer's cup full on. You have 10 minutes, 3 coffees, 3 judges, 1 head judge. How much in the decision of that, like first of all, 1, did you change the recipe between the first round and the second round? And then 2, how much was the recipe you were using in both rounds kind of reflective over the fact that you actually had to brew 3 coffees? Was that important or?
So I was thinking about all of this before I got there. And because I've watched a lot of competitions over the years, and I really had a good some good feedback as to how I knew I wanted the structure to go. Obviously, nothing ever goes according to plan. I knew that. But the recipe in mind, I did not. I knew it, regardless of if I had gone with that recipe or a different one, I knew that that was the one I was going to use. I knew that I wasn't going to change it. I watched, I think it was the champion from Singapore. He talks about this a little bit. Like he wanted his best cup and his best recipe for round 1 and for round 2. And that made sense to me. I didn't want to change too much because whenever you're in an environment like that, changing things could actually do a lot of harm, especially since there was a lot of questions that I had whenever you get there. We find out what coffee it is. How long has that coffee been rested? It's a different roast batch, so you can't just like keep changing. And I wanted to, I actually did. I wanted to. And Chris, who was there competing with us, was like, just let it rip. Just like, don't do it. And, I used the round 1 water because we had to, and I knew that, and I actually had some locally that I could buy. So every test was with that water. So I knew that water pretty well.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And then, yeah, I didn't change my, sorry if I think I answered both your questions.
But yeah, maybe just a quick one about what was the actual, like, what's the name of the water we used?
It was the Agua Glacier. It's Agua Glacier, like artisan spring water.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Its ppm is like 130. I measured it at home, which is quite high from what I'm normally used to. So
definitely, right. A little bit of a challenge, right, for sure. But that also answers one of my questions, which would have been the water, right? But
yeah,
let's maybe segue this into another question about water, because you're using 185 Fahrenheit, which is 85 degrees Celsius, as your brewing temperature. And at least in my world, that is for sure on the lower side in terms of a brewing temperature, right? Do you want to walk us through a little bit of, like, is that something you normally do? Is it specific for the coffee? Like, what were you hoping to bring out with that lower temperature?
So I knew that it, to me, palate wise, it seemed like a lower extraction was where this coffee shined the most. And I thought that, the ratio was kind of defined already. So, and I really loved the texture of the ratio, because that was the one thing in the cupping that I really enjoyed, was that the texture was just like awesome. So, the ratio helped with that. And I think that the temperature really, in my mind, helps with texture a lot and mouthfeel. And And I had practiced with a few different water temps. I went really high. I went to around 197, 199. That's actually usually where I stay. Like I don't really ever go as low as 185. And but my initial recipe was actually 185 and then a second kettle with 175. I would do everything with 185 first, and then the rest was with 175. But when I got there, I realized that it would just be in my best interest, especially with the new roast batch, after I had tested, to just stick with one kettle and turn the kettle off and decline it. So that's what I decided to use in competition. Initially, it was, though, using two kettles. But I think that the acidity was a bit more defined, I think. And then I thought that things were a little bit more clear, right? I thought I had like a greater flavor separation whenever I used that water with that coffee. It was a really dense coffee. And I knew, I just knew that it was just too bitter and that water was really, honestly, if I knew I could use a different water in the first round, I definitely would have. But because that water's ppm is so high that I have to just get in, extract everything, and then get out. And that's basically the theme of that recipe.
So that also reflects in let's say that second pour as well, because if you start with that 70 grams, is there any specific reason for it being 70 grams? Like it could have been 50, it could have been 100, it could have been 30. I don't know. Why is that 70 grams?
Well, I think that when you I know from experience that a higher blooming amount of water is used, typically a larger amount of perceived acidity is there. And especially from what, like, if anyone's ever experienced like doing the 4 to 6 method for the first time, that'll teach you a lot about how coffee extraction works and pour overs. But that's what I have taken away for a long time now. And I knew I wanted the acidity to shine in some way. And I could really only do that with a larger amount of water at first, especially at that coarser setting. And I knew it was coarser. So I knew I needed that a smaller bloom or smaller amount of water at the start was as well. Because I wanted to just pop just a bit more. I wanted to make sure that cup amongst a couple on the table was going to stand out. Like I knew that's whether it was good or bad. I wanted people to go like, oh wow, that's different. Like what's different about that? And I actually had upgraded my burrs before getting the coffee. So
what did you use? We never talked about the grinders so far. Like what kind of grinder were you using?
So I used a Fellow Ode version 2, but I have some SSP multi-purpose burrs in the grinder, and those are 64 millimeter.
What grind size were you using for that 15 gram dose?
So I was actually pretty coarse. I was around the 7 on the Ode. Which is pretty coarse.
I'll say that's pretty coarse.
And I think I went I believe I went 1 or 2 clicks finer in competition. Actually, I think I did, because I knew the coffee was I felt like the coffee was way more herbaceous, like when we got there. But yeah.
Fair enough. And when you say clicks, you mean like basically not like 7, 6, 5. You mean the small kind of in between? I don't know if they're like 2 steps or 4 steps.
Yeah, it's not stepless, so it just 2 clicks next closer to the 6. So I think that's and I think there's only 3 between each click, so like 6 point.
Something like that, it's actually the grinder that I just used to win in Sweden as well. The nationals. It's I do have the original burst. I have to say, I'm not so much fan of SSP, but I think it's funny how good the grinder actually is. I think I know they had
really is
quite a lot of critique maybe with the first generation there, but I think they kind of fixed that pretty well, and I'm quite happy with it. Okay, super cool. So the second pour, so you do that 70-gram first pour, and then you move over to a kind of a long continuous pour up to 2025, right? And what would you say would be the main kind of difference between that continuous pour and not doing a continuous pour?
I think a difference in agitation is the main difference. And when I was in competition, I told them that I was doing about 4 grams a second as like the flow from the kettle. And I actually, if you notice, I'm actually kind of tilting the kettle inward, like the spout of it inward. This is something I've seen in a lot of Asian-oriented styles of pour-overs, where they're taking the kettle and not actually going horizontal, but rather like slightly vertical, which I think is fascinating because they're basically using the flow restrictor in that kettle in a different way. And I did that in competition to really make sure my flow was at 4 grams a second and as straight down as possible. Because given that the coffee was coarser, I still needed a fairly decently long drawdown time without sacrificing, causing too much agitation. So to kind of let the coffee slowly draw down, but not in a very actionable way. So that was the main reason for the larger single pour at the end. And I also just think I do single pours all the time now. And it really is largely due to what I've seen through April. I mean, like, I remember just being like, whenever seeing this single pour for the first time, just being like, this is ridiculous. Like, this is absurd. Like, it's just kind of like, it's just another variable that I honestly think makes every cup better, period.
For sure. And I think if at least if anything, how you pour water on coffee matters, right? I think
absolutely
that's, maybe the most important takeaway. And I think what you're saying about going coarser and then you try to regulate that flow rate by basically pouring slower or keeping the water bed or water level in the brewer lower is going to also give you a slower brew, longer contact time, right?
Yep.
So there's more ways than just adjusting your grinder to be able to get that. And I'm kind of in your team in the sense that I think that a coarser grind size generates a better taste experience, pretty much. And then regulating that strength or contact time with your pouring just makes a lot of sense, right? Definitely. Then you do this and you kind of aim for 2 minutes 30 as your total brew time, which is also kind of that's somewhat our go-to as well, for sure. What is the main thing there? And is that something, again, specific for the competition coffee or something that you would in general kind of do as well?
I think that's generally the time I pretty much stick to with 15 grams across the board. At home, I do 15 in and 240 out pretty much all the time, which is a 1-16. That's a flat 1-15. I don't really go to 1-15 anymore. I used to be like a diehard like 1-15 person, and then I liked 15.5, and then I was just like, I think most of the coffees from the specific coffee roasters I drink now just simply require more water and taste better. So 2.5 minutes to 3 minutes is usually the window of time that I stay within. And to me, like, brew time is just a guideline. Brew time is never a matter of like, brew time is a way for you to hold yourself accountable. It's really and get a feel for the grind size. Like, I know my kettle. I know how I pour. I've been making pour overs for years now. I think that the brew time, again, is just a way of tracking what you're doing. And it's obvious something needs to change once you reach a certain threshold. And to me, that's a good thing.
For sure, it's an indicator that isn't, sometimes if sensory is the only indicator you have, that can be, problematic. So it's just easy to have some kind of other reference point. And again, like
Totally.
the only reason why we track stuff like this is because, again, when we compete, we do, or we're
Exactly.
in a coffee shop, we want to be able to be consistent, right? It's about, I'm serving 100 coffees today. I want all 100 coffees to kind of taste the same. And if my numbers adds up, most likely they're tasting the same, right? So
Hmm.
there's always this different, like, competition wise versus, brewing at home as well, of course, right? I mean, when you guys competed now, you had me looking at all of the numbers. Are you pouring in the same amount of time? Are you pouring in the same way? Are you pouring the
Hmm.
right amount of volume, right? So it becomes very different in a competition setting, right?
Totally.
Was this? I mean, I already know the answer to this, but you can tell people. Anyhow, what's your kind of competition background? Was this your first competition, or you've been around before? Or
Yeah, this was my first time competing, and I was not planning on winning at all. You know, I, I've been managing and working in shops for a long time now, and making coffee really at home, like well for quite some time, and I had a pretty good game plan going in, and I learned a few things while I got there that really helped. But I had the next 3 days in LA to myself. And so if I didn't make it, I was totally fine with that, because the main reason I did this, and I asked Rev to do this for me, and it was for a new experience. And I'm grateful that they decided to do that for me. And when they said that it would be the same price either going out on Friday or going out on Saturday, I was like, I'll do Saturday. I don't care. And I had a place to stay, and my buddy lent me his car, and I mean, it was brilliant. So it didn't matter to me, and I wanted to meet everyone there. I wanted to know who those people were, what they did, and talk to them. And we actually had a lot more in common than I thought. And it was incredibly humbling experience.
that's super cool, and I think it's. I mean, we should say as well that you actually then flew in from, kind of far away. I mean, you're still in the country, but
Mhm.
it's also not around the corner, right? So which
Yeah,
which
some
is
people
really
thought I
cool.
drove actually, and I was like,
Oh
no,
yeah, how isn't
no.
that very very far? I don't know.
Yeah, it's
Maybe
very
not.
far. It's very far. It's I think like 6 states over. Yeah,
Yeah, that's it's a. I mean, sure. I mean, Americans tend to like to drive, I guess. At least that's the general notion, right? But it's still
I
pretty far.
don't.
No, fair enough. No, but super cool, right? And I think a big part of the competition as well is, one, first of all, anyone competing can win, right? I think sometimes people forget that, right? And you'd be surprised over how many people like you actually say that, yeah, I didn't plan to win. We have a lot of people in the competition in general that they come and they just assume they're not going to make it to the second round, so they haven't practiced a presentation. They don't
Mhm.
really know how to brew three cups at the same time. Um, and you should never say never, right? You don't know until you're there. And if you brew tasty coffee, you can clearly win, right? So it's people should always come in prepared, I think, right? Okay, super good. So first competition, was it like you, let's say, expected it to be? Like, were you very nervous? Were you very kind of, just comfortable? You seem very comfortable, but what was the biggest challenges kind of competing for the first time, and what is the, let's say, the obstacles to overcome? Because I feel a lot of people, they build up all of these ideas about, no, I can't compete because of this or because of this, and it's difficult. I'm not ready. Whatever. What's your kind of, what got you over that hurdle in the first place?
Well, I think the first thing was I had known that, like, I mean, this is in LA, and the competition will be very steep. I think that was the number one thing for me. I was and the same. I think it's the same winner in Singapore, but he won using like a Weber key, and I was like, okay, well, people are bringing Weber keys to this, so like
Sure.
obviously people are bringing really really nice stuff, and so and with that comes a large amount of competition. And like, I knew that's why I upgraded the burrs. I knew I had to do that. And, to give myself some kind of edge. And, once I kind of got over that and I met everyone, when I met everyone, oh my gosh, I was totally fine. And if you go into a competition like that, any competition, like anything that's where you compete, and you are under the impression that you will not win, you're probably doing yourself a favor because I think when I thought of it that way, it really helped me out. And you would be surprised just how many people are supporting you whenever you feel that way, and then you make it and they didn't make it, and Chris was doing that. I mean, Chris was like, he had competed professionally before, and he had an amazing setup, like an immaculate, like a tray, everything built in for his mellow drips. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe he's already like, and I had prepared for a script just in case. Like, you still need to prepare, right? We shouldn't say,
Oh, sure.
Don't prepare. Like, you should still prepare if things happen, and know that it can happen. But if you give yourself the sort of relaxed mentality of like, I might not win this, I think that will do you a lot more favors than you think. Because if you go in there thinking that you're constantly going to win, you're constantly going to do this, I just don't think you're going to be setting yourself up for success. And that's just like a big thing for me. Because even down to latte art throwdowns, people know how that feels going into that for the first time. And I remember not winning one, and always being like, it's always coming down to like the stupidest stuff. Like, the judges are like artists. They're not even like people in the profession. And like, this is ridiculous. But then you forget that latte art throwdowns are not very intense for a reason. And you're actually the one making it really intense, because latte art throwdowns, especially where I'm from, are community events. They're not really events for people to champion the barista. They're about like a community of coffee shops coming together and having fun and sharing this business together and this environment together. And people forget that. So if you think about it through the lens of that, I think that you will do a lot better than you realize.
Oh, sure. And I think that community is a big part of it, right? Because I mean, you experience that now as well, right? And I've always said that when competing myself, like the best part is being backstage, hanging out with everyone else competing, right? Granted, there's good and bad people in that scenario as well, right? But it's in general, people are there for the same reason.
Sure.
And winning or losing, there's a lot of respect and there's a lot of other value that can come out of that, right? Like, competing is really just showing that you care about the industry to some degree, right? And you want to be an active part of it, right? And winning or losing is always going to, that's going to change. Compete enough times and you will do both, right? That's just how it is.
Absolutely.
There's no other way around that, right? But I think that's a good. Do we have anything else you feel you wanna put in this as well before we kind of wrap it up? Otherwise, I think it's a kind of good ending. You mentioned your Instagram before, right? You sharing quite a lot of recipes and ideas. So do a shout out there. So
it's called Tasty Coffee Journal. But if you go under my main page, which I think people should probably follow a lot more, it's it's Lacour and then with 3 R's. That's my last name.
Awesome.
But I think if there's anything I want to say, I don't think so. I think I just want to. I'm just incredibly humbled with the whole experience, and I think the people I met there were so fun, and it was so fun getting there, and everyone being like, "Hey, can I try that whenever you're done?" Like, like brewing that, like, and that was the funnest part for me. Because that actually gave me a really good idea. I was tasting everyone's, and I was thinking to myself, like, wow, a lot of our coffees our brews are actually pretty similar. Like, they're not very different. And that was one thing I did that I don't think anybody picked up on, is that, so in my first round where we're just going head to head, I had an empty carafe in front of me. And that wasn't intentional. I was the only table with an empty carafe in front of me. And I was like, oh, I was like, you know what? If I put this into the carafe and then if I brew into the carafe and then pour into this empty carafe and then pour into the serving cup for the judges, my coffee will be the coolest, the fastest. And I was already using a pretty low temp. So to me, I knew that the coolest coffee was going to be easier to taste inherently. And so and that was another part of trying to get my cup to stand out more. Because my goal wasn't to make like the tastiest cup possible. I wanted my coffee to stand out, and I wanted the cup itself to surprise people, because that coffee was very specific. And if it tasted a different way, but in a good way, I think that is really interesting. Because like some of the recipes I've had in the past from even like Brewers Cup champions or anything like that, we always try them at home, right? And then we go like, this is kind of weird. And like, it's really coffee dependent, right? And people forget that. But when you try those recipes with the coffees that you have at home, you discover really weird things about the coffee in front of you. And I like that. And I knew that was gonna, I wanted that to happen on the judging table. And if it didn't, again, wasn't a big deal. I'm here for the next 3 days. So
I think that makes a lot of sense. And it's also just a good tip for anyone going up in any, let's say, knockout round competitions, right? Like AeroPress competition is maybe one of the better examples. So it really comes down to standing out. I think so, more so than anything else, really, because and I mean, I'm saying that having judged a few of them, it's really, can someone do something with this coffee that we don't expect you to do, right? And that's interesting, and being interesting has a let's say better likelihood of you moving forward to that next round, right? So I think that's just tactically smart, right? And I think there's a lot you can do and kind of try as well in that kind of setup, right? So
it's like using the decaf that we talked about earlier,
Oh, sure, yeah. So for those of you that don't know, the winner of the American Brewers Cup, which happened basically the weekend-ish before we recorded this video, and he competing in Chicago, used decaf coffee. Who knew? That's a bit of a new thing. But yeah, you have a better insight into that coffee and that company than I do. So maybe you want to share some.
Yeah. Oh wait, what did you say? I'm sorry.
Oh, maybe just you want to share some notes about it, because I think did you actually try the decaf? No.
Oh, no, I haven't tried it yet. I will be getting it sent to me though.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So I'm pumped to try it.
Maybe I'll send some.
Yeah.
Now, let's see. I'm assuming maybe he's going to use it in the World Championship, and then I get to taste it there. Maybe.
I hope so.
I mean, if the decaf wins, then that's gonna. I mean, it's fair to say that the competition has changed quite a lot since I competed in it last time. But I think the one thing we haven't discussed yet is what would happen if a decaf wins, right? I mean, that's that's a new one. I think we haven't quite seen that before, right? So that would be quite interesting. Yeah,
definitely.
Well, super. I think it's a great time to kind of wrap up, and thank you for competing. Super cool, and again, congratulations for winning, right? And that if you ever feel you want to jump into your National Brewers Cup, you just give me a call, right, and we'll set you up. That's part of winning the competition as well, right? Is to get our kind of support in that process if you're ever up to it.
I think I might be next year. I will certainly give it a lot of thought.
Yeah, for sure. It's just a fun thing, right? And again, it's like you said with April Brewers Cup. It's I always say that if your goal is to at some point maybe try to win a national competition, then you have to compete every year until that time comes, right? What a lot of people do is that they say, okay, but in the future I would like to do this, but then eventually they actually start, but then they've lost so many opportunities to practice So it's just good to, jump into it, maybe with the idea of, not winning then, for example, but just to kind of ease yourself into it, right? I think that
Absolutely.
makes a lot of sense. We're gonna make sure to at least keep our eyes open, and you're always more than welcome to reach out if that time comes, right? And just thank you for taking the time to be with us here now as well.
Thank you, Patrick. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you, man.
Thanks to Ian for sharing his recipe. It was great to have him in the competition. Naturally, thanks to all the other competitors, organizers, and partners that we have as well. Now, the next chapter for April Brewers Cup is coming up, and we're excited to again share all of those new dates with you. To stay updated on what is coming, please make sure you subscribe to this channel, subscribe to our newsletter, and follow those social media, right? Now, with that in mind, we always want to thank you for watching and supporting us here. Your comments, your thoughts on where the competition should go next, if you want to compete, what you need to get that kind of extra push to compete perhaps, is always really interesting for us to know. So please share in the comments below. And with that, again, we want to thank you for watching and wish you a good day. We want to give a special thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. It's because of you that we are able to continue to make these videos. And we want you all to feel free to always come with suggestions and ideas on the content that you want to see, because we are doing this for you and because of you. Thank you from all of us here at April.